In the next 30 seconds, you're going to see a team of U.S. Special Forces survive one of the deadliest ambushes of the War on Terror. Snipers on rooftops, RPGs hitting close, air support overhead, and it's all caught on tape.
Oh my God! That shit was a fucking bomb.
On a cold January morning in 2016, a 12-man detachment of Green Berets from 3rd Special Forces Group were traveling in armored Humvees through the Nangarhar Valley in eastern Afghanistan. They weren't here to fight. This wasn't their typical kill or capture mission. It was supposed to be a meeting with a key Taliban leader. They'd received word that a Taliban commander in the valley wanted to switch sides, said he'd grown tired of fighting, that he wanted to cooperate with Afghan forces and surrender his fighters. Believe it or not, these meetings happened all the time, and most of the time they were legitimate, but this one would go down as one of the most violent, up-close ambushes U.S. Special Forces ever faced. The night before, the team had gone over the intel again and again. The Afghan partner force would provide security and help facilitate the meeting. The Green Berets were told the defector would arrive just outside a village known for its tribal neutrality. But neutrality in Nangarhar was flexible. They'd be entering an area flanked by ridgelines and blind spots. Even worse, the U.S. element would have to dismount several clicks away and walk in on foot, with only light armor holding the rear. The situation wasn't ideal, but it wasn't necessarily unusual either. That morning, the sun was rising behind the ridgelines as they made their way through the valley. It was a cold, dusty morning. They passed children on donkeys, and a farmer waved from a poppy field. The whole area felt way too quiet, even for Nangarhar. Staff Sergeant Matthew Thompson was on point. He'd been in country less than 2 weeks at this point. Captain Jason Westbrook, the team leader, was near the center of the convoy. He was actively scanning every rooftop, every valley, every shuttered window. He wasn't new to Afghanistan, but this felt different. The compound came into view, a small sun-baked cluster of mud brick buildings. No movement, no sound, all quiet. The team formed a perimeter as Westbrook approached the front gate with their Afghan interpreter. The man they were supposed to meet was already waiting. Tall, bearded, dressed in neutral garb, no rifle, no smile either, just a nod and a gesture to come inside. No one initially noticed the boy on the rooftop across the alley, but when he suddenly took off running in a flash of movement, everyone tensed. Staff Sergeant Thompson saw something shift in a nearby alley and began to pivot his rifle. And then seemingly out of nowhere, a 360-degree ambush kicked off. Automatic fire, RPGs, and IEDs tearing through the alleyways. The first shots didn't even come from within the compound. They came from the tree line, from the rooftops, and from the shadows behind the team. It was a full 360-degree kill zone, and they were stuck dead center of it. Within seconds, it was clear to the Green Berets that this whole thing was a setup. Staff Sergeant Matthew Thompson took the brunt of the blast. An IED hidden in the alley detonated as he pivoted left. It wasn't random, it was remote detonated with surgical precision. He was thrown back, his gear torn wide open, and the shockwave rattled the entire formation. 2 Afghan soldiers nearby were shredded instantly. Captain Westbrook quickly ducked behind a crumbling wall as rounds snapped overhead. Dust completely filled his mouth, but he managed to key in his radio. Call in air support, danger close, we are being flanked. One by one, the team of Green Berets were falling back to cover, but they weren't retreating. They were preparing to make a stand. Their Afghan interpreter was wounded, shrapnel across his chest, blood soaking through his tunic. The interpreter was trying his best to cry out for help, but he couldn't get any sound to come out. As he was desperately crawling towards cover in the middle of the kill zone, Sergeant James Clark, the team's combat combat medic, ran through open fire to drag the interpreter behind a burned-out motorbike for cover. Clark immediately got to work patching up the interpreter's wounds and stabilizing him. He then went back out into the kill zone to save more wounded. Above them, one of the team's snipers had climbed to a rooftop. His name was Sergeant First Class Derek Mahoney. He carried a suppressed SR-25 and the weight of everyone below him. Through dust and smoke, he could see muzzle flashes to the east, and one by one, he began dropping targets. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was swarming now, dozens of fighters closing in, many disguised as civilians, some using children as human shields. It was asymmetric warfare at its ugliest. They weren't just trying to kill the Green Berets, they were trying to shatter them, morally, psychologically, and strategically. And just as the team feared they were about to be completely overrun, they heard it, low, slow, and angry. The unmistakable growl of an A-10 Warthog circling overhead. Staff Sergeant Jeff Rollins popped red smoke. He laid the designator on a cluster of fighters rushing their eastern flank. The pilot confirmed. Visual on red smoke, cleared hot. The 30mm cannon tore through the enemy fighters like a buzzsaw. Fighters scattered, screams echoed through the valley. The ambush had just met its match. For the first time in over 20 minutes, the team had breathing room, but it was temporary. One casualty confirmed, another clinging to life, enemy fighters still circling like wolves. And with the element of surprise lost, the team would now have to fight their way out, street by street, alley by alley, all while keeping their wounded alive. The red smoke had cleared briefly and the compound was quiet. The ambush had failed to kill them all in the first wave. But it wasn't over yet. It was just shifting. From hit and run to full pursuit, the Green Berets weren't in a firefight anymore, they were in a war of movement. Inside the compound, Staff Sergeant Thompson was critical. Shrapnel was embedded deep in his abdomen and he was fighting for each breath, and his skin was now turning pale. The team's medic, Sergeant James Clark, was doing everything he could. Chest seals, tourniquets, IV fluids, but Thompson needed a bird, and fast. Captain Westbrook radioed for immediate medevac. Priority 1, urgent surgical Green Beret blast injuries. But airspace was too hot, and the enemy was massing again. From the rooftop, Sergeant First Class Derek Mahoney scanned with his optic. Movement southeast corner. A building door opened. 2 figures emerged with RPGs. He didn't hesitate. The SR-25 cracked twice. One went down, the other ducked. But now they knew where he was. A rooftop across the alley then erupted. A lone RPG arched through the air, targeting Mahoney's position. He dove back just in time. The warhead struck the wall behind him, sending bricks and glass everywhere. He was bleeding from the ear, disoriented, but alive. The team below laid down suppressive fire. An M249 saw ripped across the alleyway, tracers stitched through the windows. An enemy PKM suddenly opened up from a rooftop farther back, sweeping across the Green Berets. They were pinned, outgunned, and still outnumbered. Captain Westbrook had a decision to make: push out and risk more casualties, or hold the compound and bring the fight to the enemy from within. He chose the latter. They fortified the walls. Mahoney moved to a new firing position. Clark finished treating the wounded and picked up his rifle. Every man in that team was now in the fight. The enemy was coming again. More fighters, different angles. Mahoney counted over 20 closing in from the far tree line. So he reached for his laser designator and marked the cluster of enemy fighters. But this time, his call wasn't answered by an A-10 Warthog, it was answered by an F-16. The F-16 rolled right over the top of the enemy, dropping a 500-pound bomb right on their heads. The blast rolled through the city. The entire building shook, but so did the enemy's momentum. For a moment, they paused. The second assault had failed, but Thompson was still critical, and the team knew they couldn't hold out forever. They needed extraction, but the landing zone was 2 clicks away, and the path to get there was still crawling with hostiles. They had just one shot, one narrow window to move, and they'd have to carry their wounded the whole way. The fireball still flickered in the tree line. Smoke drifted across shattered walls. The second wave had been broken, but Captain Westbrook knew what came next. The enemy would quickly regroup, and they'd come again even harder. And the Green Berets were out of time. Thompson's vitals were dropping. They'd have to move now. They loaded Thompson onto a makeshift stretcher. He was unconscious but alive. Their Afghan interpreter, still bleeding, was carried over the shoulders of another teammate. 12 men, 2 wounded, with enemy forces closing in, and 2 kilometers of narrow alleys and farmland between them and their extraction point. Intel from ISR overhead showed at least 3 pockets of fighters ahead. The route was a funnel, one choke point after another. Westbrook keyed the radio. They needed cover, they needed firepower, and they needed angels above. Fortunately, their angels were already en route. 2 AH-64 Apache gunsheds from Task Force Pirate were on the way, armed with 30mm cannons, Hydra rockets, and Hellfire missiles. The gunner quickly spotted the team's movement. Green smoke popped to mark their position. What followed was surgical. A long burst of 30mm shattered an enemy trench near the canal. Hydra rockets tore into a compound where fighters had staged an RPG team. The valley lit up like a Christmas tree with thunder in every direction. And beneath it all, the Green Berets moved step by agonizing step. They moved in staggered bounds, 2 covering, 2 carrying, then switch. Every corner, every field, every tree line a potential ambush. Sergeant Clark, the medic, had to drop his rifle to keep pressure on Thompson's wound while dragging the stretcher forward. His arms were shaking, but he didn't stop. Just 800 meters from the LZ, they were pinned again. Sniper fire cracked from the ridgeline above. 2 Afghan commandos hit, 1 dead, 1 screaming. Mahoney went prone and scanned uphill. A glint, a head, a breath, 1 shot. The snipers went silent. The Apache pilot came over the radio, "Paint your danger close and we'll finish it." Mahoney lit up the ridgeline with IR, and the Apaches turned. The ridgeline disappeared in flame. The team then broke the final fence line into the wheat field. The LZ just 200 meters ahead. Rotors thundered. A medevac Blackhawk came in hot, kicking up clouds of dust and grit. Rounds continued to snap overhead. The enemy was sprinting from a village behind them, desperate to cut them off, to kill or capture the wounded. Bullets zipped past as they loaded Thompson on board. Clark then collapsed onto the helicopter, covered in blood, with his hands raw from dragging his teammate for over a mile. With one last sprint, the rest of the team piled in, except for Westbrook. He stayed out, secured the perimeter, and fired the last rounds out of his mag, then jumped on board. The door gunner lit up the tree line one last time, and the Black Hawk lifted up into the gray sky. 12 men walked into that valley, and 12 came out, wounded, shattered, but alive. They'd fought their way through a kill zone, carried their wounded brothers for over a mile under fire, and lived to tell the story. But for many of them, the war didn't end that day, it just changed. The flight back to base was completely silent, just the hum of the helicopter. Staff Sergeant Matthew Thompson was rushed into surgery within minutes of landing. The doctors didn't wait, there was no time. He flatlined once on the table, but they brought him back. Shrapnel was removed, organs were repaired. He spent weeks in recovery and months relearning how to walk. Today, he wears the scars, but he's still standing strong. For the rest of the team, the wounds weren't always visible. Sergeant Clark, the medic, was awarded the Silver Star. Captain Westbrook received the Bronze Star with Valor. Mahoney did as well. Each man was recognized and decorated. The battle in Nangarhar never made headlines. No medals were pinned in front of flashing cameras. No documentaries, no movies. The men who walked through that valley, they carried something heavier than their rifles. They carried each other, through fire, through chaos, and through hell. And they managed to bring every man home. This video is dedicated to the operators of 3rd Special Forces Group who fought in Nangarhar 2016. To the wounded, to the brave, and to those still fighting battles we cannot see. If you made it this far in the video, all I can say is thank you. This wasn't just a mission, it was a brotherhood tested, a moment that defined a dozen warriors for the rest of their lives, and their story truly deserves to be heard. Not just for the tactics or for the cool guy factor of these stories, but for the men behind the rifles who never stopped fighting, even when the bullets quit flying.